Got it.
Okay. So again, thank you all for joining me. And I just begin by saying the name of the Buddha or the Nembutsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Today is the second session of our fall-winter lecture series. And what I wanted to do was, first of all, continue on with where we had started last time. And in particular, so last time I introduced what we were going to do. The topic or the title of this series is Shoshinge, the Heart of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. And Shoshinge is a verse that was written by Shinran Shonin, the founder of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. But without understanding Jodo Shinshu Buddhism or the history behind Shinran Shonin, it's very difficult to understand this Shoshinge. So last week we started going over a bit of the life of Shinran Shonin, and also getting up to the point where he was writing his magnus opus, the true teaching, practice, and realization of the Pure Land Way. And in order to understand why Shinran Shonin wrote that, we had to look a little bit into a very prominent Buddhist concept that was going around at that time. It has been passed down mainly from China, but it was this whole idea of the declining Dharma age. And I went through parts of that, and I said we'll continue on today with continuation of that. And that was, and I sent out the information to you, so you probably had an opportunity to look at it. And I also sent out more material that we'll be covering for this evening's lecture. But this idea of the declining Dharma age, the basic idea was that after the passing of the historical Buddha Shakyamuni, that over a period of time, there's going to be changes that occur, and that the teachings, the Dharma, may not remain pure as it was while the Buddha was alive. So, very simply put, when the Buddha is alive, and if you have a question, you just simply go up to the Buddha and ask the question, and then he would reply or answer that question. But once the Buddha passed away, they had to rely on the teachings that remained. And the problem not the problem, but what happens over time is that there are interpretations that can take place of these teachings, especially when you get into things like translations as well. Translating from Sanskrit, Pali into Chinese, and even within Chinese, there's different dialects, and then from there you're transferring it over to Korea and Japan, and translating into Japanese again. Things can change. I don't know if you've seen or heard of the broken telegraph line or broken phone line, the game where you have a bunch of kids and they line up, like about 20 of them, and you send one message from the first person says something, and they whisper it on down the line, and by the 20th person, it's a completely different message. That can happen. And in particular, when the Buddha was alive, this is 2,500 years ago, and things were not written down on paper. Paper, like as we have today, was non-existent. So it was an oral transmission where the master would talk, the Buddha would talk to his disciples, and they would basically memorize what the Buddha had said. Now, when the Buddha was alive, this was easily done. Well, not easily done, but the Buddha would go from place to place, and most likely he would have repeated some of his talks in various places. So those who were closest to him, his disciples, would hear these teachings uh, numerous times, and eventually it would become their own teaching as they listened, took it in, and it became a part of who they were. So they could recite verse for verse what the Buddha had said. So this was fine while the Buddha was alive, but as time goes on after the passing of the Buddha, then you begin to see some changes. And part of the changes that happen is that there are people who are going through the motion, if you will. They're following the scriptures. So after the Buddha passed away, over a period of about 600 years, it took that long for the teachings to get put into a written format. So what happened after the Buddha passed away? Of course, it was this oral transmission from the masters to the disciples. When the Buddha passed away, immediately they held what they call the Sangha Council, and that's when all the monks gathered at one place. And there, some of the closest disciples, like Ananda, recited the words of the Buddha. And then Upali, another of the close disciples, recited the rules, what we call the Vinaya, the rules of the Sangha. And so originally that's how they would pass it on. They would recite what they had heard. This is in fact why in all the sutras you notice that it begins with "Thus have I heard." Thus have I heard. Okay, so because it was oh sorry, I'm just going to mute you all on, and if you have questions or whatnot, please unmute yourself. But I'm going to just mute you all for just the time being. So that's how it was passed on. And then over a period of time, then what happened was they realized that they should have something in writing. So they first of all put it in palm leaves. The type of palm tree, the leaves, they etched it into there. And then they put these palm leaves into baskets. They separated them. And so initially there was one basket that was the teachings, the words of the Buddha, and there was another basket which contained the rules and regulations. Okay, so the one with the teachings or the words of the Buddha was called Sutta Pitaka. Sutta or sutra means words of the Buddha, and Pitaka means basket. Okay, so Sutta or Sutra Pitaka were the actual words of the Buddha, as was transmitted down from his closest disciples. This is about 300 years after the Buddha passed away that they actually first put it down into this palm leaves. And then the other basket they had at that time was what they call Vinaya Pitaka. And Vinaya means rules or regulations, and Pitaka is basket. So originally they had the words of the Buddha as well as the rules and regulations. Okay. And then a little later, there was another basket that was created, and we call this the Abhidharma Pitaka. Abhidharma are commentaries by great monks. So there were commentaries made on the teachings of the Buddha. So these three baskets then became known as the Tripitaka. Tri, is three, right? And then pitaka, baskets, tripitaka. So you may have heard or have heard reference to the Buddha Dharma. Often they'll call it the Tripitaka. Those are the collection of the Buddha's teachings, the regulations, as well as the commentaries. Okay? So then, after a period of time, these palm leaves finally got put into print onto paper. Okay. And one of the things that they also did as they put it onto paper was they put cadence into many of the teachings to make it easier to memorize. And that's how you get the development of chanting. Okay. So chanting are the words of the Buddha that we chant, and there's a cadence to it so that it's easier to memorize. I know some of you have been attending temple for many years, and there are probably some sutras that we chant that you've memorized, or like our Dharma school children, they memorize, for instance, the golden chain of love. They don't have to see any text; they've got it memorized. So, in a similar sense, with the teachings through the chanting, one can memorize it. But so over a course of timeline, this whole ideology that the Buddha's teaching is going to deteriorate became quite a popular belief system, especially when we get into China. And so, as I mentioned last week, this idea of Mapo, or last Dharma age, becomes very prominent. And according to that, there's several ways of uh, dividing the timelines. And the most common and popular one is, so all of the Buddha's teachings are based on what we call the three pillars of Buddhism, or three pillars of attaining enlightenment. And that is that you have the teachings, and then you have a practice based on those teachings, and then you have attainment, realization, or enlightenment by following that. Okay, so the goal of the Buddha, the historical Buddha Shakyamuni, was he had numerous goals. One was, of course, to find enlightenment for himself, right? So when he left the royal palace at the age of 29, Siddhartha Gautama, he went on a spiritual search for enlightenment, or to find the meaning of life, if you will. And he spent 6 years doing various ascetic practices. And then in the end, he realized asceticism by itself was not the right path. And then he contemplated under the Pipala tree, or the Bodhi tree. And after 49 days, attained this level of consciousness, this, what we call enlightenment. And so initially, this enlightenment was for himself. But ultimately, he realized that this enlightenment had to be shared with others. And so, out of great compassion, he started teaching. So, the second goal of Buddhism was to find relief of suffering, or to find enlightenment for all beings. So, initially, it was just for himself, but also he realized it has to be release of suffering for all beings. So that's why he started teaching. So based on that, you have the teachings, you have the practice, and then you have enlightenment or attainment. Okay, so what this declining Dharma age theory or idea states that depending on the distance away from the time of when the historical Buddha passed away, we go into various distinct eras, if you will. And so the first 500 years after the passing of the Buddha was seen to be a very pure age. So that's where the teachings still exist, and people can follow those teachings relatively as they were supposed to follow them. And then they would also attain enlightenment by following those teachings. But then for the next 1,000 years, it's what we call the semblance Dharma age. And that semblance Dharma age, it meant that, well, because we're getting further away from the close disciples of the Buddha, there's interpretations that are happening, and things are people are not following the teaching as purely as they did before. Some of them, they're emphasizing more the practice aspects and less about the true meaning behind it. So this is known as the semblance Dharma age. So you have the teaching still, you have still a number of people who are following the teachings, but then you have very or fewer people are actually attaining enlightenment, because it's semblance. It's sort of a semblance of the pure age. So they're going through the motion, as I was mentioning, and so fewer people are attaining enlightenment. And then after that, for 10,000 years, it's known as the last Dharma age. And according to this one, at that point now, you have the teachings are still there, but even fewer are actually following the Dharma. And then very, very few, if anyone, can attain enlightenment during that period. So this is the era where you see more secularism. People are moving away from spirituality, and so this is also defined in a different way, a different breakdown. And there's another one that breaks it down into 5 distinct periods, 5 periods of 500 years each. And the first one is very similar to the right Dharma age, is a period of strong enlightenment. And during this time, just as the right Dharma age, the teachings are there, people are practicing it, and they're attaining enlightenment as well. So the next 500 years, which corresponds to the first 500 years of the semblance Dharma age, they're focusing on meditation. So again, people are going through the motion, but they're not necessarily seeing the true inner meaning of the Dharma. And then the next one is a period of strong listening. So during the next 500 years, this is also corresponds to the second half of the semblance Dharma age. People are still listening to the teaching and following it, but again, not as many are attaining enlightenment. Then once we get into the next 500 years, we're getting into corresponding with the beginning of the last Dharma age. And during this 500 years, now people are completely they're not listening at all, and instead of following the teachings, all they're doing is building pagodas and temples, and so it's just basically the structure that remains. And then finally, according to this categorization, the last 500 years, and this corresponds actually to the end of the last Dharma age, which is, according to that other one, it was for 10,000 years. So the end of that 10,000 year period is a period of conflict. And during this time, the Sangha have abandoned their precepts, and there's various views that come about the Dharma, and so various secularization comes about. Interestingly enough, when I was studying in Japan as a student many years ago now, I had the opportunity to go to two different kinds of schools. The first school I attended was a school called Central Buddhist Academy, and that was more like Buddhist seminary school. It was for people who were going to train to become ministers. Okay, so they not only taught us the teachings according to our mother temple, Nishihonganji, but they also taught very practical aspects, such as how to wear your robes correctly, how to fold your robes correctly, things like that. Okay. So that was one school I attended, and it was very good because as a minister, we also need to learn very practical aspects of it. Um, Another one is something as simple as how to conduct a funeral service, right? Um, so the day-to-day activities I learned at this particular school. The other school I attended, which was a postgraduate at the Ryukoku University, I did a master's degree there. What was interesting there is that they took the uh, Buddha's teachings as a subject to study. And so it was very much a scholarly endeavor. So they would take one of the teachings, for instance, and they will explain about it. And interestingly enough, the various professors had their own unique take on their own angle, if you will, on these teachings. So when you talk about this period of conflict, where it says various scholarly views of the Dharma develop, where the Dharma becomes a source for scholarly debates. Well, this is what it was, is that it became a subject of study as opposed to uh, a religious experience. Whereas the first school was much more um, spiritually motivated, if you will. There is quite a bit of a difference. So when we are studying like we are tonight, we have to try to also look at not only from an intellectual perspective, but also understanding that the experience that someone like Shinan Shonin had was very much a spiritual experience as well. So, anyways, so that was a 5 period breakdown. And the third, the commonly used categorization is the theory of what we call 5 defilements. And this one is basic or restricted basically for the last Dharma age. And what it is that there are 5 different defilements that are represented in the last Dharma age. And interesting enough, for those of you who have attended our temple, especially pre-pandemic, during our Shotsuki services, we chant the Amida Sutra, and these 5 defilements actually come out in the Amida Sutra, and there's a passage. Well, I won't even go into that right now, but um, so for those of you who have attended the Shotsuki service or have chanted the Amida Sutra, you've actually chanted these 5 defilements. Okay, and they are the defilement of the kalpas or the ages, and this is defined by periods of famine, plagues, conflicts, and wars arise. Sounds very much like our present day situation. Defilement of views, period when erroneous views become popular, leading to perverted views. Not that it's this is well, I better not play politics, but I just saw on CNN tonight that Trump is running for presidency for 2024. Not that that has anything to do with this, but and defilement of evil passions, period when evil or blind passions abound. I think we know that it seems like our modern society seems full of that. And defilement of sentient beings, where sentient beings lose the ability to realize they don't follow laws of morality or ethics, and they also don't realize the cause and conditions of things, so they act without um, thinking of the consequences. And I think our modern world really is. We see that with the global warming that's going on. That's all to do with our short-sightedness for our own modern pleasures. And then defilement of lifespan. And this one's a very interesting because as I think I mentioned last week, that the Buddha had mentioned that um, the length, the lifespan, according to the teachings, is said that it oscillates actually. When things are good, it goes up to 80,000 years, I think. Now this is the time of the Buddha, okay, that they're saying this. But as things, the defilements mount, then the lifespans get shorter, and the Buddha only enters into this world when the lifespan gets below 100 years. So yeah, so that's the uh, length of time. Interesting enough, not 80,000 years, but there was a Japanese dietitian who, when I was studying in Japan, wrote a book, and his, what was it? 1960, I think, is the title of the book. Well, he used the Japanese way of aging, which is Showa. So I think it was Showa 35 which is 1960. And the whole premise of his book was that those who are born before 1960 will have a longer lifespan than those that are born afterwards. This is Japan, study of Japan. And his primary reasoning for that was that those who were born after 1960 were introduced to Western food, in particular fast food. So what he said was that those before 1960, um, by the time they were adults, by the time fast food came in, they were already adults. So they might eat fast food um, periodically, but it wasn't part of their staple diet. Whereas those that are born after 1960, they were raised with fast food, and therefore all these illnesses that come out. And it's probably true. You see um, the older generation who have survived very long, whereas you see all the cancer, etc. It's coming from all the stuff that we ingest. So, anyways, 19 defilement of lifespan. So, anyways, sorry, I went off tangent there. So, so we see this introduction of this whole ideology of um, the declining Dharma age in what we call the Agamas, which is one of the earlier sutras. And it says, when the right Dharma of the Tathagata is about to become extinct, a semblance Dharma will appear. When the semblance Dharma appears in the world, the right Dharma will be eradicated. And it gives an example of a ship full of treasures that sinks suddenly, except he says that instead of sinking suddenly, it gradually disappears. Okay. So interestingly enough, in India, where this was written, um, they didn't give the idea of the third Dharma age or the last Dharma age. It just talked about the right and semblance Dharma age. So it wasn't until we get into the Mahayana sutras that we begin to see really the development of this last Dharma age. And it was an example that was found on carved on a rock, a stone just north of Peking. And it's written there, the true and seamless Dharma ages lasted 1,500 years, being now the year 628. Already 74 years have passed from the time we entered the last Dharma age. I carved this sutra at the time of the persecution of the Buddha Dharma during this last Dharma age, in order to spread the Buddha's words. So what is said is very important in that this whole idea of the declining Dharma age was not, it wasn't there to bring out doom and gloom, but what it was to say was that the conditions exist where the Dharma would decline. So you will have to find the right Dharma for that particular age. Okay. So they're saying that as conditions deteriorate, we have to find the teachings that are appropriate for that period. So this is a very important point. Okay. This whole idea of the declining Dharma ages was not to say the Dharma is going to disappear, but it's more ringing the alarms that the conditions are not going to be there like they were during the first 500 years. So as these conditions deteriorate, what are the teachings that are applicable for that period? Okay. So this is why we need to know this, because it is during this period that the whole the teachings of Amida actually become more and more prominent. And so for Shinran Shonin, the founder of Jodo Shinshu, of course, his awakening comes through his encounter with his teacher, Honen Shonin. So when I was showing you the life of Shinran, he had spent 20 years on Mount Hiei as a monk within the Tendai school of Buddhism. But despite the fact that he practiced for 20 years, he felt the more he practiced, the further he was from enlightenment. He could only see the negative aspects of himself, his own frailty, his own defilements. And so as this went on, it became unbearable for him. So at the age of 29, so he entered the monastery at the age of 9, and at the age of 29, Shinran decides, I got to do something. So he actually comes down from Mount Hiei, the mountain he was practicing on, and he goes and does a 100-day vigil at a temple called Rokkakudo. Rokkakudo is centered is located in the center of Kyoto, and it's said to be a temple that was founded by Prince Shotoku. Prince Shotoku was a regent prince who is given credit for introducing Buddhism into Japan. And this is about 650 AD. So Prince Shotoku was the first Japanese royalty who brought in Buddhism and believed that Buddhism should be the guiding principle for the country. Okay, so Shinran had great respect and admiration for Prince Shotoku. So that's why when he came down from Mount Hiei, he did the 100-day vigil at this Rokkakudo temple, which was said to be founded by Prince Shotoku, hundreds of years before Shinran. Okay, and in that temple, the main statue is the statue of Kannon Bodhisattva or Kuan the Bodhisattva of compassion. And it's said that on the 95th day, Shinran gets a vision of Kannon Bodhisattva in the form of Prince Shotoku. He gives him a scroll that tells him basically to go and seek out Honen Shonin, who was teaching this Nembutsu teaching to people at large. So Shinran goes to where Honen was giving his talks. And Honen Shonin himself was in fact a great monk who had spent many years on Mount Hiei himself. And it's said that Honen was known for having read the Tripitaka, the complete sutras, 3 times over. Just to give you an example, there's over 100 volumes in the Tripitaka of teaching. So to read that 3 times over is a great feat. Okay, so Honen himself was seen to be a great monk, but he himself had left Mount Hiei, and he became the follower, or he was the one who made the teachings of Amida Buddha as an independent school popular in Japan. Okay, so Shinran Shonin encountered the Nembutsu teaching through Honen Shonin, and he was the one who showed him the importance of the largest sutra on Amida Buddha. And one of the reasons why this largest sutra is seen as the primary focus of Pure Land Buddhism, or the Jodo Shinshu school, is, as it states here in that largest sutra, it's written, "In the days to come, the paths of the sutras will come to extinction. I, with compassion and mercy, will purposely make this sutra survive for 100 years. Anybody who encounters this sutra will, according to their wishes, surely attain enlightenment." Oh, I'm missing a passage here. It should be, will purposely make this sutra survive for 100 years after the extinction. So, according to the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, he said that this larger sutra will be the sutra that will outlast or survive all the other sutras. And so for the last Dharma age, it was the most appropriate sutra, according to Shinran Shonin. And he gets this not just out of the blue, but from the 7 patriarchs, etc. And as I mentioned here, that it was influenced by the 7 patriarchs. And one of the 7 patriarchs was Tao Chou, who was in China. And Tao Chou, in his writing, the collection of passages on the Pure Land of Peace and Bliss, mentions, "Of the multitudes of beings who have followed the practices of the paths of the sages in the last Dharma age, not one has yet attained enlightenment. This is the last Dharma age. It is a world corrupt with the 5 defilements. The Pure Land Gate is the only path we can follow." So Tao Chou, or Doshaku in Japanese, clearly states that during this last Dharma age, it is the time that we need to focus on Amida's teaching, because the other paths, one cannot attain enlightenment through it. So again, it's this whole concept that during this period, this is the right right path to follow. And again, Shinran, in his most important writing, Kyogyo Shinsho, writes the exact same thing. Indeed, we know that the various teachings of the past sages are practicable only for the Buddha's time and the right Dharma age, not for the semblance, the last Dharma age, and after the Dharma extinction. The time for those teachings has already passed, and they do not agree with the capacities of sentient beings. Whereas the teaching of the Pure Land compassionately guides the defiled and evil multitudes in the semblance, the last Dharma ages, and even after the Dharma extinction. It is also applicable in the Buddha's time in the right Dharma age. So here Shinran Tzuren is taking it one step further, saying that this teaching is for not only the last Dharma age, but it's in fact the teaching that is accessible throughout the ages, even when the Buddha was alive. In fact, Shinran goes on ultimately to say that the reason why the historical Buddha came into this world was to teach this Pure Land teaching. Okay? So that was how Shinran had understood this. Okay? How are we doing? Were you able to follow? Do you have anybody have questions? I'm going to stop here for now for a second. Anybody have questions? Please feel free to. Um, Let me.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Where did you reference that thing about 80,000?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sorry, my
internet is very bad.
Where did you reference that thing?
I get where did you reference that, and then it's out.
80,000
years.
Oh, okay. 80,000 years. So I don't exactly know where it comes from. I have read it on this Mapo idea, and so it is to do with the defilement of lifespan, and there is it is said that according to the defilement of lifespan, our lifespans oscillate in length. And so when at the best of times, it's said that the length of a human lifespan can be 80,000 years. And at the worst of time, I think the shortest is 3 years that they talk about. And uh, again, I don't know where or how they get back those numbers, but it's basically saying that the length of lifespan oscillates. If we don't take it literally as length, it could even be the quality of life might decrease. So we might be living longer uh, physically, but perhaps the quality of our life is not as great as it has been. I mean, I think all of us um, can recall times where it seemed life was a lot easier. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but it seems like our length of life might be growing, getting longer, but not necessarily the quality of life. I don't know. But so I'm not exactly sure where they come up with that figure, but I read that it is mentioned that the lifespan oscillates, the length of lifespan oscillates. Is that
Just
go ahead?
wants to go.
I'll
I'll
ask.
I'm getting
An echo
right now.
Oh, you're breaking up too. Is it me or is it your? Could you, Linda? Would you mind? Maybe you could type it down as a chat question, and I'll read it out.
Sure.
How about anybody else have question or comment? Yes, Atsumi-san. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
So is that
That
time?
Shin, Shinrai
For
for the
for the
what's
uh,
the
the who couldn't
attain
attain
what
what
practice
practice
he has
he has to do
for the true
true
meaning
meaning
Buddha
Buddha
stick,
stick,
and
and
then
then
he went
he went
100
100
days
days
reach at the
at the
Rokkakudo.
yes,
yes,
and
he went
to
to
learn from Honen.
Honen.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
So
after
yeah.
Yeah.
My
My
question
question is
that
that
time
time
many
many people
are
are
thinking
thinking
same
uh,
topic is
topic is
funny,
funny, but
looking
looking
for
for
way to
way to
go
go over
the
the last
period
period
of the
of the
how Dharma.
Dharma.
no, yeah. So yes, it was a very um, it, it was a popular idea throughout Asia. This Mappo last Dharma age idea, but it wasn't really thought of in the way of so the traditional schools of Buddhism still felt that their way of doing things that they can still attain enlightenment, even though they're considered to be in the last Dharma age, the Mappo period. They still felt that their schools, through their practice, they could attain it. So this the reason why the Nembutsu teaching became so popular amongst the common people was because the common people felt up until this Nembutsu teaching came about that they really couldn't practice the Dharma. It wasn't, they weren't going up to the monasteries to become monks or nuns, and so the Dharma was something very foreign to them. And it was only so during that time for the common person, the way they were associated with the monasteries was that they would give offerings to the monks, and in return, they would receive merit or benefit from that. But Honen Shonin was saying, no, in fact, that for this period of time, especially during this period of time, that this Nembutsu teaching, the teaching of Amida Buddha, is open to anybody. Because it's not through our merit, it's not through our practice, but it's because of the working of Amida Buddha. And so that became very, very popular amongst the common people, the farmers, the shopkeepers, the housewives, everybody. But those in the traditional Buddhist schools, they became very jealous of it. It was a new movement, if you will. And I'm just going to read Linda's. I think we are all hearing an echo from everyone's comments. Okay, so people are hearing echoing. Okay, so Linda says, what is the importance between the lifespan and the 10,000 years? You mentioned when it is less than 100 years lifespan, the next Buddha will arrive, but we are nowhere near the end of the last Dharma age. Oh no, not the next Buddha. It was said that when the lifespan goes below 100 years, the Buddha arrives. So Shakyamuni Buddha came because the lifespan was okay. The next Buddha, who is supposed to be Maitreya Bodhisattva, is supposed to come at the end of the extinction of Dharma. So after another 10,000 years, the Dharma completely disappears, or this Dharma completely disappears. And that's when Maitreya, the next Buddha, comes into the world, basically. So, yeah, there's some varying understandings, if you will, because I mean, the lifespan is below 100 right now, and I guess that's the historical Buddha that it has appeared, and then the next one is supposedly Maitreya Bodhisattva. Anyways, sorry.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's 8:30 now, and I haven't even gotten to our what I was going to talk about today. So, but this is a very important concept to get. So, because of this, this Honen Shonin felt very strongly himself that because he was in this period, the Mappo, the last Dharma age, that the other forms of practice were unattainable, or people were unable to follow it, and therefore he felt very strongly that this Nembutsu, the teachings of Amida, was the right practice or right teaching for this period of time. He bases that on the teachings of the 7 patriarchs, or actually 6, I guess, because Honen would include himself to it. But the teachers from India and China and down to Japan. And so when he realizes that this teaching of Amida is the right teaching for this Dharma age, he also realizes at the same time that this teaching is accessible to all beings. And so Honen begins to talk this Nembutsu teaching to people from all walks of life, and Shinran goes there and he listens for 100. After the 100-day vigil, he decides, he hasn't determined that he would become a follower of Honen yet, but he would go for 100 days to listen to what he has to say. And in fact, he does become the disciple of Honen. And so after spending time with him, so he spends 6 years as a follower of Honen Shonin. And at that time, the Nembutsu teachings become more and more popular amongst the common people. The teachings of Amida Buddha become very popular. And this creates a friction amongst the established schools of Buddhism, because basically what Honen was doing was he was empowering the common people. Up until then, their way of associating with the Dharma, as I mentioned, was through offerings, and they received merit by giving to the temples. It's like a tithing, right? So Honen, what he's done is he's taken away the middle ground, if you will, of you know the monks and nuns practicing the Dharma to benefit all beings. Honen is saying that no, that the average person can practice the Dharma. So the established schools become quite upset with this. And so for a number of years, the established schools approached the royal court, the emperor, to ban this heretical teaching. And the emperor is hesitant to do this because the people, the masses, are starting to really follow this. And so he doesn't want to do anything that will have an uprising, if you will. So it wasn't until the emperor is directly affected, and what happened was two of the emperor's consorts, wives or whatever you want to call them. I don't know if they were legally wives. They end up going to a Nembutsu gathering, and they hear two of Honen's disciples. I think their names are Annaku and Juren. And these two disciples have beautiful chanting voices. And in fact, the two consorts of the emperor become so enthralled with these two monks, their voices, that they actually become followers. And that's when the emperor gets upset. So there's a public beheading that goes on of these two, and Honen Shonin is exiled to the southern island of Shikoku, and Shinran is exiled to the northern island, or northern part of Japan, Echigo. And so then after 3 years of the banishment of the Nembutsu teachings, it's actually rescinded, and people are allowed to freely listen to the teachings. And Honen and Shinran, their banishment is lifted. And it's said that Honen returns back to Kyoto, but dies during the same year. And so Shinran, instead of returning to Kyoto, he and his wife, who he had married at Ichigo, they end up going to the eastern part of Japan. Now, during this time, after Honen passed away, so while Honen was alive, Honen Shonin was very strict about who could actually copy his writing. Honen Shonin's major piece is the Nembutsu of the Selective Primal Vow. And it was a piece that he only allowed very close disciples to actually copy. And Shinran was allowed to copy that. But after he passed away, and I don't know how this happened, that piece of work by Honen Shonin actually becomes widely publicized. And because of that, there is a monk by the name of Myoe, who belongs to what we call the Shingon sect of Buddhism. He criticizes adamantly this writing of Honen. And the major criticism that he has is that according to the Pure Land Sutras, it's missing what we call bodhicitta, which is the aspiration to become Buddha for yourself. Okay, and he says that the Nembutsu Honen's teachings on Amida is heretical. And he actually gained some traction on his criticism. So, as partially as a rebuttal to that criticism, Shinran then undertakes the writing of his greatest piece of work, what we call the true teaching, practice, and attainment of the Pure Land Way. Or in Japanese, we say Kenjodo Shinjitsu Kyogyo Sho Mon Rui. But there are a number of reasons why Shinran wrote that. Of course, it was written as a rebuttal, but at the same time, by the expressions that Shinran writes in there, it is also an expression of great joy. So I will share that with you. Where's that? So this is what I wanted to get into today, but I'm only going to get into the very beginning of it, and then we'll continue on next day. So the greatest work of Shinran Shoni, his greatest writing is called the True Teaching, Practice, and Realization of the Pure Land Way. And it was said that it probably took Shinran about 20 years to complete it. He began writing a draft of it while he was still living in the Kanto area, and then he kept on revising it over and over, and completing it when after he had returned to Kyoto in his 60s. So the final version was probably when he was in his 70s, and it's often referred to. So the formal title is this Kenjo the Shinjitsu Kyogyo Sho Monrui, and it's often referred to by its abbreviated title Kyogyo Shinsho, and which is translated as Teaching, Practice, Shinjin, Faith, and Realization. So the formal title, the True Teaching, Practice, and Realization of the Pure Land Way, in the title itself, there's no mention of what we call Shinjin Faith. So about 100 years after Shinran passed away, I think it might have been his great grandson, but I'm not 100% sure. Anyways, it was about 100 years after Shinran passed away that this abbreviated title was introduced, Kyogyo Shinsho. And that was to emphasize this Shinjin faith aspect. So this large work is broken down into 6 what we call chapters, but some of them are, the chapter on teaching is very, very short, but others are very, very long. And it is based on what we call the 3 pillars of Buddhism that I mentioned earlier: teaching, practice, and attainment or realization. And when we look at it, the reasons for writing it, and there were several reasons why Shinran wrote it. First of all, it is an expression of gratitude and joy in receiving the Nembuchi teachings. And we see this in the preface where Shinran writes, "Rare is it to come upon the sacred scriptures from the westward land of India and the commentaries of the masters of China and Japan. But now I have been able to encounter them. Rare is it to hear them, but already I have been able to hear. Reverently entrusting myself to the teaching, practice, and realization that are the true essence of the Pure Land Way, I am especially aware of the profundity of the Tathagata's benevolence. Here I rejoice in what I have heard and extol what I have attained." So again, this is an expression of joy, and this type of expression comes up repeatedly in this work. So Shinran is saying, I'm writing this to express my gratitude and joy. Of course, this work is all written in what we call the classical Chinese or Kambun. And just by that very fact, we know that it was meant for the learned, because the average farmer or shopkeeper would have been illiterate at that time. So it was written as for other monks and other learned people. And as I mentioned earlier, it was a rebuttal of the criticism that was going on for the teacher, Honen Shonin. So, in fact, this work is seen to be, Shinran is not trying to start something new, but he's trying to defend his teacher's teaching, the Pure Land teaching. In fact, Shinran never had aspiration of starting his own following, if you will, or own denomination of Buddhism. It's actually only after he passed away that takes place. So through the writing, Shinran was trying to clarify the Nembutsu teaching as a legitimate Buddhist lineage based on the three pillars of Buddhism: teaching, practice, and realization. And although it's broken up into 6 chapters, we have chapter 1, which is a teaching, the chapter on teaching, chapter 2 and 3, which are chapters on practice or true practice, and Shinjin faith. They're both talking about how practice and the attitude one should have during the practice. And then chapter 4 and 5, 4 is on the realization, chapter on realization, and 5 is 5 and 6 are actually describing a description what the right realization is like, the nature of realization. Okay, so, and we'll go more into this next week, but this is, and the Shoshinge, which is the verse that Shina wrote, is part of this larger work. So it's only one short portion within this very large piece of work. Okay? And so that's why it's important to understand sort of the basis for this. And we'll get into that a little bit more next week. Okay, and I sent these notes to you just earlier as well, so you can take a look at them. Okay. So, any questions or comments or anything from you, Ted or Rose? You're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
There we go. There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think
I think we've got,
yes.
yes?
Yeah, yeah.
Is it
Is it echoing?
It is echoing. Why is it echoing? Let me see what I need to do. Hang on.
I think
Hang on. Give me 2 seconds. I think it has to do with my audio system, maybe.
so too.
Too much technology.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just. Do you want to try that one more time?
Sure.
Sure.
Is that any better? No?
No, no.
How do we do this? Oh, wait. Which one? Do you want to try now?
Sure. How's that?
Good.
Yay. Yeah, as I'm reflecting on what we're talking about this evening, but I think about the time that we're no, it's the game echoing.
Well, you think about it.
Yeah, I will.
Marilyn, do you have anything or you're okay? You're okay? Okay. How about you, Karen? Do you have any questions or comments? You have to unmute yourself.
No sense. It's interesting. Thank you.
How about you, Michael? Anything?
I found it interesting that Shinran didn't intend to start a new school.
Yeah, I could talk a little bit more about that next time. It is very interesting, though. Anybody else? Yvonne? Francis? Anything? Sharon? Questions? Tomoko always has questions. Oh, Francis has something.
I think we're echoing again.
Are we echoing again?
Yeah.
I was sort of thinking, no disrespect, that Honan had a good marketing strategy, almost making it easier for the common people to kind of come into this religion, then maybe getting followers, and through that becoming true Buddhists, but it was just a thought, so almost a marketing strategy.
Two. No, he doesn't.
Well, I think that was maybe unintentional, but yes, I don't think he was thinking of it as a marketing strategy, though. Okay.
But Sensei,
Yes.
isn't that this Kyoto Shinshu, they are doing the religion revolution against the emperor group.
That actually comes a little bit after Shinran Shoni. It's called Ikko Ikki, and that's a little bit after Shinran, where basically what it was that there were groups that said if we're all equal in receiving the Dharma, why should there be this inequality amongst people? And so there were some areas in Japan where the local peasants actually overthrew the warlords, saying that why should we be paying taxes to these warlords when we're all equal? And so that was called Ikko Ikki. And that actually created some problem. That was more around the time of Renyo Shoni, which is about 300 years after Shinran. So that comes up afterwards. But yes, there was revolutionary revolt. In fact, it was interesting because in 2016, a number of us went to Japan on a tour, and we actually went to an area in Japan, Fukuiken, and there, Renyo Shonin has spent some time there, and they had we stayed at a ryokan, spa, and they had some entertainment in the evening, and it was called Iko Iki drumming, and they were these taiko drummers that were replaying some of this uprising that they had. It was very interesting. It wasn't totally unexpected, but yeah, that is part of Jodo Shinshu history too. Anyways, it's getting close to 9 o'clock. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next
Thank you,
week.
thank you.